There it is. Good afternoon, everybody. It's now 1 o'clock, so I'd like to call this meeting to order. First on the agenda is the roll call, and I think Sally has that taken care of. So there's then declaration of interest. If anyone has any interest, you can bring it to our attention now or at any time during the meeting if something comes up. The next is the adoption of the agenda. So the resolution is that the agenda for July 8th, 2024 Board of Directors meeting be adopted as presented. Could I have a mover? Okay, thank you, Dina, and thank you, Mary Lou. Second it. And is there any discussion, additions? Seeing none, take a vote. All those in favor? It is carried. Next, we have the approval of the board directors minutes of May 13th. So be it resolved that the minutes of the board of directors meeting held on May 13th, 2024 be received and approved as printed. Could I have someone to move that, please? Okay, Roy and Jeff. All right, any discussion of the minutes? Anybody noted? Seeing none, could we all in favor? Yeah. Carbohydrate overload here. Okay. There's that one. The receipt of the draft minutes policy planning committee. So they've been approved, right?
So
Yeah.
just
Just an FYI. Okay. And then, so we go to the employee presentation, enforcement activity updates, and Will, you're here to provide.
Zoom, just share, and it'll come up. You'll find yours.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Do I have to navigate to the folder as well?
No, it's already loaded in PowerPoint. You go to share. Okay.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is William Ernewine. I'm the regulations officer here at the Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority. I was hired back in July of 2023, and I'd like to take the time this afternoon just to give you a brief overview of enforcement at the MVCA from 2023 to present. So as we all know, as of April 1st, 2024, there were some changes made to the Conservation Authorities Act and the regulations under. Specifically, appointment of officers was changed from individual regulations to the Conservation Authorities Act. Changes were made to officer power for entry into private property without warrants. Offenses and penalties were also changed with the addition of higher fines, and that applies to both individuals and corporations. Okay, getting into the meat and potatoes of the presentation. So our concerns, violations, and charges, along with convictions from May 2023 to May 2024. So we had a total of 113 files. Now, this was our total workload. For enforcement, we had 88 concerns. These were, from various phone calls, emails, and the submission of concerns from our website. Those totaled 88. These are subject to change. It varied from May to July, so I had to cut it off at May just to give you guys an accurate statistic. We had 18 violations, 4 legal charges, and 3 convictions in this time span. Okay, so what are the disturbed areas that we've been dealing with in the enforcement section? Mainly, we're dealing with unauthorized development in floodplain areas, the adjacent lands regulated, along with wetlands. So I'm not going to get into specifics for actual locations with these. These are just some examples. So we have fill placement in floodplain and adjacent lands, development of roadways through wetlands and the adjacent regulated lands as well. But mainly, we're working with fill in floodplain, how we deal with that, along with roadways through wetlands and adjacent lands, and how we deal with that as well. Okay, so when we observe unauthorized development, when we issue that notice of violation, we typically go one of 2 routes when we're not charging. So if the works that are unauthorized that have been observed do fit policy, if they had, the property owner come to us before the development, we typically would have approved. So we go with a retroactive permit. That's if the work would be approved under policy and applicable regulations. Now, if we're dealing with works such as a bunch of fill gets put in a floodplain, it's not supported by policy, we go with a remediation agreement. So these are for cases where the works would not be authorized and we need to remove certain works or implement other measures to correct what's been done unauthorized. So when we observe unauthorized development, some typical measures that we employ are site drive-bys. Now, a good amount of our investigative measures can be done just from the public road. We don't need access to the property for a lot of these because we can see so much from the roadway. We take photographs, videos, we take notes, and we also take GPS coordinates from the roadway. If we're dealing with a parcel that's in a wooded area or we're dealing with an ambiguous address, a lot can be recorded and observed from the roadway. Now, before we even go out, we typically review permits. We review what's been issued, what's been permitted, what are the specific conditions rather, what's the scope of what's been approved. We review aerial mapping. This gives us a review of what's happened in years past, what's the change, what's been happening in the last year, what's the difference really. So in the bottom left, we have an area. I'm not too sure if you guys can see it from the table, but we have a wetland area affected. That's 1 year. On the right side, bottom right, we have an area affected by fill, same area, but now a road's been put in place and fill has been put throughout the wetland and adjacent 15-meter lands, 30-meter lands, sorry. Now, if we're dealing with a property owner who's not being very compliant with what we need, who's not giving us the consent to conduct an investigation on their property or even enter for that matter, we do have the tool of a search warrant in place authorized under the Provincial Offences Act. So we go through all the proper channels, we make use of the tools that we've been authorized to use, and we investigate accordingly thereafter. So in the recent year, our legal workload comparatively to other years has been pretty average, I think. On the left, we have convictions. On the right, we have current charges. I'm not going to get into specifics about location, but on the left, we have unauthorized fill placement in floodplain and adjacent lands, unauthorized fill placement in wetlands and adjacent lands, and alteration to water courses. On the right, we have work spanning from clear cutting in wetlands, both PSW, provincially significant, and unevaluated. We also have instances where probation orders have not been complied with, along with other violations associated with conditions being violated on permits. Okay, so when it comes down to getting a guilty plea from a property owner, a contractor, or an agent of work, it really comes down to, are we going to get a guilty plea or are we going to a trial? Now, the factors that motivate parties to be cooperative with the CA really comes down to their personal attitude towards regulatory agencies, the applicable policies that we have in place. However, for the vast majority of times, we do enter into guilty pleas with defendants. This makes it easy on us because it allows us to work with property owners, which is our key objective. We get to shape conditions that are satisfactory towards our policies and regulations, along with the Conservation Authorities Act. In cases where property owners are not willing to cooperate on any level, when they, fight the advances that we've had with them, we typically would end up going the other route. So in light of all the enforcement and the statistics that I've mentioned, I just want to let everyone know that it should be noted, for the most part, we are not going to court. So in 2023, we issued 205 permits. There were only 18 major violations in the time span mentioned, and of those violations, we only had 3 charges. First and foremost, we want to work with property owners. We do not want to observe something and issue a summons. That's not our business. That's not our goal. We want to work and gain voluntary compliance. A lot of our job specifies the first 3 building blocks of the pyramid. We like to make it easy, and we like to provide education, best practices, and really any communication that can persuade people to work with us, not against us. So some upcoming challenges and ongoing challenges that both I and the organization have seen, just some updating to the regulation policies. So as of April 1st, we had those changes. With that, we had pollution and conservation of land removed from tests, and some feature definition changes, including watercourse definitions being changed. As a result of this, I have encountered some public communication issues where people might see the word conservation authority and assume that we're in the business of environmental spill cleanup or issues with sediment and erosion control when we need, people think we need to remedy certain pollution. It's not the case any longer. It's also a big watershed. And like I said, I've been here for about a year now. So there's a lot of issues that pop up throughout the watershed. It's one of the biggest in the province, to my understanding. And there's a lot of nuances to whichever files that we're working with that need to be learned. And everything's a learning process. So going from the Frontenacs to the Constance Bay area, each region has its specific requirements and clientele as well. Property owners all differ from location to location. So just a learning experience, learning how best to manage the watershed. Thank you, everybody. Any questions?
Thank you, Will. Does anybody have any questions? I do have one, but anybody else? Okay, I'll ask my question then. It's more of a comment. How much does an average permit cost?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
How much does a permit cost, an average permit?
So it depends on what work is being conducted. For something as minor as some fill placement in a hazard area, it might range from 260. I think it varies from quantity, or it does vary from quantity. When we're dealing with a retroactive permit or a remediation agreement, anything that has to do with a violation, those fees are doubled. So if a fee is originally $1,000 and we're dealing with a violation, it gets doubled. This is both to provide further revenue to the organization, but it's also to demonstrate that, yes, that is unauthorized. So we can't just pursue or proceed like we would normally if you had come to us prior to doing the work.
Okay, thank you. That's basically what I was asking, because we've recently did the same thing and it seems to have helped where, if you don't get a building permit and then show up because we were retroactively allowing people saying, well, there wasn't anything, we've doubled the fee, and it seems to have resonated with people that if your fee is double, or, I got my building permit, but I just decided to do a bunch more stuff too under the same permit, and you say, well, yeah, you didn't follow the permit, now it's double.
Of course.
Seems to resonate. So I'm glad that policy is in place. That's what I was going to ask.
Yes.
Thank you. And thank you very much. Nice, short, concise presentation.
Yep.
Oh, Glenn, you have a question?
I do, just a few quick ones. Thank you for the presentation. I think this is I'm always interested in these updates and how we approach regulation and inspections. I was wondering if we do any comparison or benchmarking with other conservation authorities. I know each watershed is a very different geographical area. We're a very large one, but do we have any sense if we have more or less violations being reported or enforcement activities than other conservation authorities across the province?
From my experience this past year with my communications with other members of other CAs, I think this year was relatively heavy in enforcement. This may be due to staff turnover. This may be due to outstanding violations that have now been focused on more than others. This year certainly was heavy. However, on an average basis, I can't comment on our workload versus other conservation authorities.
Yeah, I imagine that's difficult because it's comparing apples to oranges in many senses. So
For sure, for sure.
yeah, we're probably best to look at it year over year within MVCA's catchment area to see where trends might be going, I guess.
Yes.
And I also just want to say on the website, there is a page that lists kind of contact info, or if people do have a concern. And I think the information there is really good. I looked it up today, and just in terms of, you mentioned a lot that's not within the authority of Mississippi Valley, but I think you've done a good job explaining who to call about tree cutting, about toxic spills and so on. And I'm going to be sharing that with my team here in the office, because we often get complaints about all sorts of things that happen near creeks or watershed areas. So anyhow, thanks for the presentation and for the information.
Yes, of course. It's certainly, it's not always negative when we get concerns that don't fall within our mandate. It gives us an opportunity for that public outreach, initiating a rapport with property owners and just giving that general baseline of education that some people don't know. People see conservation authority. What does that mean? And that phone call definitely does allow us to explain that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt, do you have anything to add on the enforcement around the province side? Might have a bit more depth.
Yes, just to Eastern Ontario staff meet yearly and we discuss enforcement files, and it's a presentation. It's a good learning experience for staff. And so my observation over the last COVID was a little different because the courts were shut down and there was a backlog. But on average in Eastern Ontario, I would say we're on par with most of the conservation authorities, laying 3 or 4, anywhere from 2 to 5 charges a year, and having 100 inquiries, and violations can vary, but we're on par. I don't see one conservation authority in Eastern Ontario more heavy-handed than the other. So, but we can keep track of those stats as we have those meetings.
Okay. Again, thank you, Will. That was great. Okay. Next on the agenda is the general manager's update. And I've also asked Sally to comment on the, I don't know if anybody saw the CBC report that the minister has intervened in the Raisins, South Nations, and Rideau Valley Conservation Authority to cease implementing a policy that is already, Sally tells me, right across the board in the province. So that may have interesting impacts, considering they basically said, don't do it. So anyways, so I've asked Sally to comment on that. Thank you. Take it away, Sally.
Okay, I'll start with that. So as Paul mentioned, a news item broke late last week and was picked up by the CBC today. So some of you may recall that in 2016, 17, 18 or 16, 17, yeah, MVCA implemented policies governing non-designated wetlands, in that they hadn't been designated PSWs, but of a certain size because of the hydrologic value that they play within the watershed and other values that they bring. And this was done in part because the Conservation Authorities Act actually directs conservation authorities to do that. And it was challenging when our jurisdiction did it, and Matt can tell you stories, and I'm sure some of you around the table can tell stories. It was not an easy process, and it was a hard thing to communicate. And the 3 jurisdictions to the east of us are the last in the province, to the best of my knowledge, to actually go this route and implement the policies. And they were spurred to do so because of the regulatory changes, in part, that Will just mentioned, that came into effect April 1st. So collectively, they decided to move forward with implementation of the policies, and they're encountering the same kind of reaction as we did at the time in 2016, 2017. I can't comment necessarily on their approach or methodology. They've been criticized in terms of, timelines and communications approaches. I really can't comment on that. I can tell you that, as a courtesy, we were circulated some information, and if people are interested, I can get this PDF'd and send it out to board members so that you can see what was circulated by RVCA to at least the likes of us, and I'm presuming other municipalities and CAs that they felt would be of interest. I don't know what they circulated to community associations or the like. There is apparently some conflicting information, and that I have no better insight than anybody else in terms of whether or not the province is going to make this permanent hold for those 3 CAs, or pausing, as the CAs have indicated. As Paul alluded to, and as I mentioned, this is a policy that's been in effect in all other CAs in the province for many years. We were late to the game in 2017. So it's not like this is new policy that's taken effect. So I will be curious, as I'm sure all of you and others will be, to see how this unfolds. I don't think that what they've been asked to do is unreasonable, given that most of us have already been down this road, but they do have a communications challenge in front of them, and I hope it all resolves nicely without embroiling all other CAs and the potential implications it could have on us and our wetland policies and the likes across Ontario. So that's what I'll just say on that matter. Okay.
So, I'm getting too close to the mic. I think it's very short-sighted. I know from our municipality, and I believe Beckwith's in the same shape, Mississippi Mills, in that we have two different Mississippi wouldn't, but Beckwith
Okay.
does, and ourselves has two different jurisdictions because we have the two different conservation authorities. So on one side of the line, here are the rules, what MVCA is, and here what RVCA is. And I really had looked forward to this change coming forward so that our poor planner wasn't of two minds to have to say, okay, where are you on this? Which side of the line are you on? One you do it, one you don't. So anyways, this is a wait and see what's going on, but I think the province is being very short-sighted in this. Anyways, that's my final comment. I'll allow Sally to go ahead.
So a couple of other things from the GM update I just wanted to highlight. So we are still waiting from the province regarding Kashwakamak Lake Dam, regarding whether or not a stage 3 archaeological assessment is going to be required. So this project is sort of in a pause position right now while we're waiting for that feedback from the province. But in the meantime, this weekend, Alana, who many of you met on the board tour, she's going to be attending the Kashwakamak Lake Association. Is it an AGM that they're having on Saturday? So she'll be presenting on the EA to the Lake Association this weekend. Number 8, the WECI applications. Just mid last week, we heard back from WECI with some questions that Euro has now followed up with them on. While it was nice to see they had questions regarding our projects, it does speak to the fact that it's now the second week of July and we don't have a determination for this year's capital projects. So that's an issue. And interestingly enough, some of the questions pertain to year 2, 2025 projects that are contingent upon year 1 programs proceeding. So we continue to be frustrated in terms of how that program is administered by the province, but hopeful nevertheless that we do get some monies this year and we get notified in time that we can actually use the money effectively. I did want to draw to your attention number 12, which is the bill at 185. Of course, this affected many of you, which is the Cutting Red Tape to Build More Homes Act. I'm drawing this to your attention mainly because I did touch on this at a previous meeting, but you can see Conservation Ontario's response in the attachment. The province did not address the issues raised by Conservation Ontario, so we continue to have concerns about how that's going to be implemented in terms of ministerial powers to override certain conservation authority decisions. And just FYI for your municipalities, there is this program, New Trees for Life, Hero Forest program, that may provide municipalities up to 75% funding. So I just wanted to make you aware of that your staff, if they're interested, might be able to make an application. And it's interesting because it says heroes is very broadly defined. So it could be, volunteer type heroes. It could be from your first responders. So it's a very community oriented program. So that's all I wanted to highlight.
Any questions for Sally? Yes, Richard.
Sally, is it called Alice? How do they advertise those programs? I see there's quite a bit going on, just started like 2 years ago and now there's something like 10 projects or something. But how does the general public find out about this? I know the first year was sort of a closed club, but I just wondered if they're advertising now.
Yeah, we have done advertising, and of course, we're at the rural fairs a lot. I'm just gonna draw on Matt if you, because I know that we did a comms plan for this year, just general outreach on all our stewardship programs. So I can't speak specifically to Alice, but Matt, do you recall the variety of mechanisms that we've been using?
It goes out to all the municipalities, all the events, the farm show, newsletter, like it's the OFA, I think it goes directly to them. Yeah, so
And certainly it's on Facebook or social media and the like.
I'll confirm that, Richard, with OFA, but I'm pretty sure because Marissa is in contact with them.
We're also in partnership, not just with Alice, but 2 or 3 other programs, including the Rural Clean Water Program, looking at doing a shared postcard that could be mailed out as well. I think we've used them off and on over the years, but it's going to co-promote. But to the best of my knowledge, we're pretty much fully subscribed for Alice this year. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure, like that was supposed to be a farm-led thing for farmers, and I just wanted to make sure, like the OFA, as long as I haven't seen it in their newsletter or anything, but I think that's the way it should be promoted because it's supposed to be for farmland.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, it is.
Okay.
All right. The next is the appointment of a public advisory committee member. And if you've read through the thing, Mr. Bruce Moore is there, and wow, what an individual. So be it resolved that the Board of Directors appoint Bruce Moore to the Mississippi River Watershed Plan Public Advisory Committee. Do I have someone to move that? Roy's moving it. Second. Okay, I saw Mary Lou first. Okay, any discussion? Okay, so he's a career diplomat. Should be interesting. Anyways, all in favor? Carried. Got an excellent person on. Okay, next we have a report by Yuri on the Carp River floodplain mapping. I would make mention that I understand that the package was provided on the Carp River that was presented by Faith Bakri. And Faith Bakri, I believe, is online. If there are any questions for Ms. Bakri following Yuri's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. So I presented a slide deck previously at the PMP committee meeting last month. So for those of you who attended, there will be obviously some repetition, some overlap, but I also added some new slides, so there will be new content today for you to watch. So why are we doing this update? So we're doing this update because the existing floodplain mapping for Carp River that we have dates back to 1983, and it's more than 40 years old, right? And much outdated at this point. And since 1983, there was significant development that took place in the upper part of Carp River watershed, Kanata, Stittsville. And to illustrate this, I found a copy of our 1983 floodplain map that you can see on the slide. I don't know if you can see the cross sections, but you know, it's black and white. Obviously, it's 40-year-old. But what you can see is basically that, you know, the road that goes like north-south, that's Eagleson, and east of Eagleson, you see it's just farm fields. And it's all now being developed, right? So there is, you know, stormwater collection system underground, and basically all this changed the hydrological response of the watershed. The other thing that happened in the past 20 years is the Carp restoration project that transformed the corridor of the Carp River that runs across Kanata. You can see portion of the restoration project on the same slide there. And this was not reflected and accounted for in our 83 maps, right? So there's another reason why we need to do this update. And lastly, you know, we did not map slope hazard back in 1983. It was only flood hazard. So we proceeded with this project in 2021. So it's been 3 years for us to get to this point, and we completed this project in partnership and financial support from the city of Ottawa. So here you can see the study area. Carp, as you know, is our second largest river system in our watershed. So we've looked at the entire river system from the Appaloosa Park in Kanata, where the river basically begins, where the buried infrastructure basically outlets into the channel of the river, and all the way down to the Ottawa River. So this is more than 50 kilometers of the floodplain, one of our largest projects that we've ever done at MVCA. And we, as part of this update, we mapped both the flood and erosion hazards. Now, this is just like a typical approach that we follow on all our floodplain mapping projects: delineate, prepare, adopt, share. This project was completed in accordance with all the provincial, federal, municipal floodplain mapping guidelines and technical standards. And on top of that, this project was also part of an independent technical review process, which was facilitated by the city of Ottawa. And so all the deliverables, maps, modeling, methodology report was reviewed by a qualified third-party engineering team that have the technical expertise to be able to review and comment on this work. In terms of methodology, I don't want to talk too much about the technical details. I just want to maybe highlight a couple things. One is that we really spent a great deal of time collecting the data to get the best data that we could get for this project. This included the LiDAR data that we obtained from the city of Ottawa, the latest LiDAR data for the area, for this whole watershed. But also MVCA, we surveyed the entire river channel of the river. Alex, you might remember that project, right? We spent 2 summers basically just, surveying the channel, collecting the bathymetry data for Carp River. And on top of that, we also resurveyed the Carp Restoration Project because there were some questions about the accuracy of as-built. So we basically spent extra time and we resurvey the restoration area as well. And the other thing I just wanted to mention here is that in addition to the regulatory event, we also mapped other return period flows, one of them being the 350, kind of the future climate change scenario. I know last time there was a question, how does this compare to the regulatory event? I didn't have the answer because we're still in the process of mapping the 350. I do have it now. So when we compare the 350 with the 100-year, the flood elevations can go up more than 30 centimeters in the upper Carp River, where the floodplain of the channel is narrow. And as we move downstream towards, the rural areas where the floodplain widens, obviously the difference is less apparent in terms of the vertical difference, but can be more apparent in terms of the spatial flooding. So this basically, the 30 centimeters kind of reminds me, the FEMA practice on the US projects where they use the food of freeboard, kind of like that extra factor of safety, right, for their projects. And at the same time, the province is updating the provincial floodplain mapping guidelines, and the climate change will be part of the update. So we'll see what that will bring. I'm a member of the floodplain mapping technical team, so I will have that information when the time comes. We spend quite a bit of effort on validation of our maps, validation of our models. And we use the latest technology. We used aerial drone surveys. We were kind of lucky because there were some recent flooding that we could utilize for this purpose. You can see some aerial drone footage here. So basically, we were able to survey the extent of the flooding, and also we use our survey equipment to basically measure the flood elevations. And then we use this data and we run our model and compare it to the data that we observed in the field. And so there are some examples on this slide. The left image shows an event from April 11, 2023, from last spring, and which kind of was confined to the river channel. And you can see that the model, like really agreed well with what we saw in the field. And then the image on the right shows another event from May 1st, where the entire floodplain was filled with flood water. And again, the model was able to reproduce this event really well. So we have some good confidence in the modeling results. The other step that goes into floodplain mapping is ground truthing. So once we produce our draft maps, we have many questions, a lot of things that we need to go back to the field and just verify, whether it is hydraulic conductivity, culvert inverts, things like that. So again, it's just a sample of, the things that we checked in the field to make sure, the maps are really reproducing the conditions properly. As part of this project, we produced 47 map sheets. These were produced at the scale of 1 to 2000, which is a really good scale because it provides you really good high, resolution, high detail. And for the aerial imagery, we used DRAPE 2019, and I will get back to this because there are some implications of it. And I think we're in a process of obtaining the new DRAPE. I think will be coming in 2025, Alex, right? Yeah. Okay. So when we now compare the new maps versus the existing maps, what we can see. So the map on the left compares the new and existing flood lines. I believe the other red is the new flood line, and you see it's basically some small differences, local differences. We don't see some large scale changes in the spatial extents of the floodplain. But we cannot say that about our regulation limit, which is shown on the other map. Again, the oranges are our new regulation limit, and the other line is the existing regulation limit. And it's just a zoom in into the area. I think this is in Fitzroy. So we see, the flood lines are almost identical, but the regulations lines are different. And the reason for it is the erosion mapping that we did this time. And it was not reflected in the regulation limit back from 83. And when we look at now the elevation profile, new mapping versus existing mapping, so the figure on top left shows the entire profile for the entire river. And again, we see, it can go, up and down, but mostly it's, in line with the mapping from 83, with the exception of the restoration area, which is shown on the figure below. And this is to be expected because the restoration project basically engineered the floodplain and the river corridor and provided additional storage, right? And we see that in this area, the updated flood elevations are generally consistently lower than the elevations from 83. There are some exceptions, the Campo is one, the Campo River crossing. The bridge was constructed, I think, in 2021, 2022, so this was not reflected during the restoration project. So when we see a slight increase in the flood elevations, which is basically a new hydraulic constriction was constructed in the floodplain. And I guess the other thing I would like to point out is the area just immediately downstream of Glen Kern flood control facility, where we see the new elevation significantly lower than the existing elevations. And this has nothing to do with the Glen Kern facility. It has to do with the Hazelden Bridge. As you can see, the red line is really, like back in the 83 was really backing up the elevation in the river. So this is a summary of basically all the affected properties in the watershed. The total number of properties is 637. What is interesting is there's only 29 new properties that are affected since 1983. And over 266 properties are now no longer affected. These are mostly in the upper watershed and are related to development. Land was sold for the development. These are parcels of new subdivisions. And it's also, the area east of Eaglestone is now underground stormwater collection systems, right? So that's also is contributing to this number. But then when we look at the rest of the numbers that are insignificant, we have only one house in the floodplain, right? We have maybe one bridge that doesn't have safe access. So this kind of maybe speaks to the development over the last 40 years, that was maybe carefully, planned. And also, I guess this is also good news in terms of, hazard management, obviously, right, in the watershed. Now, I have more detailed slides, for all these affected properties. I'm not planning to present them today, but during the discussion, if anyone wants to see, any specifics here, then we can certainly look at those. Now, going into public consultations, we started the process in the spring, March this year. We published the notice of this project, in local newspapers, social media, our website. We mailed letters to all affected landowners. Over 600 letters was mailed. And then we posted, the maps on our website for review comment. We held numerous meetings with city staff at different levels. We met with, the public, with landowners, with developers, permit applicants. And then we had the open house on May 2nd in Kanata Beaverbrook Center. The open house was well attended. We had almost 60 people attending. And we basically, we have a system in which we record all the comments that we receive. The table shows kind of like the summary of the comments, and you see that vast majority of the comments were related to, the development of permitting, like what I can or can't do on my property, and what is the process, for obtaining permits and whatnot. A couple things that kind of resonated from all this public consultation. One, and I think it was also asked last month, is that, we have residents in the lower portion of the watershed and farmers, and they raise the concern that all the development is happening in the upper watershed is now flooding our properties, our fields. So we are really lucky here that we have a real-time monitoring station. The federal government monitors stream flow in Kinburn. And so this is continuous stream flow record that goes back to the 70s. We have more than 50 years of stream flow data for Carp River. So when we analyze this data, when we deep dive, and for each year, we find the annual maximum flow. That's the figure down to the bottom right. And we plot this, and we actually see that these annual maximum flows are decreasing. There's a downward trend. And to kind of understand this, we need to look at when are these events occurring, right? So when we take these points and we plot them on this big polar plot that's on the left on the slide, which shows now the dates, right, and the months of the year, that we see that vast majority of these flood events happen in the spring, March, April. You can see those points, the blue points, which means that these are all snowmelt events. This is spring freshet, right? So now we can think, so what is happening really here in the watershed? We can think of climate change, obviously, right? A good example is this past winter, where we lost almost all our snow in February, and we were worried about how we will be filling up the lakes. So that's one thing. So it's less and less. If we have melt throughout the winter, then there is less and less snow left at the end of the winter for the one final melt. that typically produces these flood events. We can also think of the urbanization that is happening in the watershed, because you all know that the snow has a tendency to disappear much quicker in urban environments, and the snow is gone and after, like for weeks, we go for a hike in a forest and we still see snow on the ground, right? So this is kind of like the urban heat island effect, right? That has impact on that. And we have large open spaces, paved parking lots, the snow has a tendency to disappear much quicker. But this is only half part of the story. Because when we start now looking at the more frequent flow events, we see the mean flows, for instance, top right. Now we see an increasing trend, right? So when we look at, for instance, the 2, 5, 10-year events, flow events, they have an increasing trend tendency. Again, it can be climate change, right? We know that there's expectation that we will see more and more storm events. But it also can be, again, the urbanization, the effect of the urbanization, right? Because if you have large paved spaces, there is less infiltration and a much faster runoff response, right? So kind of like to conclude this, it's not an easy answer, but we don't have any evidence that the floods are becoming more severe in the watershed, but they might be more frequent. Now, the other thing, before I wrap up, I would also like to maybe comment on flood levels. And I know that floodplain mapping is a highly technical discipline, and this can be confusing to sometimes to non-technical audience, and without this, just so much information and methodology that goes into this, and can be easily misunderstood and misinterpreted. And this is why we have the public consultation process, so we can meet with public residents and discuss, the maps and what things mean and what not. So we've received comments, so why the flood levels change. They're not the same as they were during the car restoration study 20 years ago, or during the existing, the floodplain mapping from 40 years ago. So I mentioned the watershed changes, like if we expect, if there was no change, we wouldn't be doing this update, obviously, right? So we are expecting this to change, and that's why the update is being done. The data that goes to these studies, obviously we're trying to use the best data possible that we have. The LiDAR data, for instance, or the as-built information for the restoration area, that was not available, during the time when the restoration project was being designed, or for the 83 study. Vertical datums change, we have now studies that follow the CGVD 2013, right? Or CGVD 28, just this discrepancy in vertical datums on floodplain maps can produce 30 centimeters of difference. We need to understand that, right? And then the methodology, we need to follow a methodology that was established by the province for floodplain mapping in Ontario, right? This is not a study for bank erosion or creek restoration or design of stormwater infrastructure, right? So just a couple of things I know which can be maybe confusing is on the bottom, a screenshot there we see, there's just a screenshot of one of our floodplain maps for the area where the new Campo Bridge was built. And when you look at the map, you don't see the bridge, right? Because the bridge was built in 2021, 2022. Our aerial imagery is from 2019, right? It doesn't mean that the bridge was not built into our model and into our study. We had detailed as-built information from the city, right? So it's and as I showed earlier, this actually led to an increase in flood elevations in that area. The other thing is the restoration project not only enhanced the river, but also created additional storage to support future development, right? And and this was done by compensating cut and fills. While all these approved cuts were done during the restoration project, the fills are still, being performed by the individual landowners, right? And not all of these projects were complete at the time of this study, right? So you see an example, the blue area is one of the area that hasn't been filled yet, but we still need to map it because there is still the hazard is present, right? So, and that's what we've done. But it also doesn't mean that once this is filled, it will change the flood risk, the flood elevations, because it's been already accounted for in our modeling, in our study, right? All the approved cuts and fills. And maybe the last thing to mention is, so obviously the Glen Cairn is our only flood control facility in the watershed, and it significantly helps to reduce the flood risk. And it's been filling up with sediment over years. There was one, I think the last maintenance and dredging, I think it was back like 10 plus years. So the facilities, with the sediment is losing its storage. So for the purpose of floodplain mapping, we used the existing elevations in the facility, right? So we are reflecting the existing storage that's available, not the storage that was designed 30 years ago. Just for information, the city actually already has plans to address this issue, and it's on the agenda to basically dredge the facility in the near future. So this will be addressed. So, and before I wrap up, I just want to say that really, the purpose of the floodplain mapping is to identify and map hazards, right? Really the purpose is to protect people, from flooding, direct new development, away from all these high risk areas, and then, manage risks. That the scope of work for in floodplain mapping projects is not to establish new policies, whether it's for flood levels, projects, developments, or infrastructure projects, channel restoration, identify, alternatives for storage in the floodplain, or inform capital projects, right? So with that, this is basically the last slide with the recommendations to the board, and I'll just open the floor for any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, the floor is open for questions. Anybody have any questions? Alan?
Thank you. You mentioned that the Glencairn Pond is higher now,
Yes.
and that measurement was taken after they did all the work where they excavated out all the sediment and added in a pump so that you could actually pump the water out before it got to too high a level?
So there is another pond it's a wet pond that has the pumping station. So that's upstream of Glencairn. The Glencairn is a dry pond, and it was dredged, if I am not mistaken, maybe 10, 15 years ago. But since then, the time is here for another maintenance and for another dredging.
To take out the sediment.
To take out the sediment.
But the pump does provide a backup should we get
Yes.
high rainfall. Correct?
Yes.
Like what had happened before.
Yes.
Okay, and then are you taking into account all the work that's been done along the system to either prevent or hold back some of that water in a major rain event, such as the 1,000 backflow valve?
So the Glencairn is the
inlet
only.
Control devices, sorry.
Yeah, the
The house, but on the street, it's the inlet control.
The Glencairn is the only facility that is accounted for in the floodplain mapping project, because again, floodplain mapping typically does not include the attenuation effect of the stormwater collection systems, stormwater management facilities and whatnot. So that's the provincial, process to make that this study, conservative, because stormwater management funds might not be, regularly updated, and regularly maintained and whatnot. So that's the reasoning behind it. It's not really a flood control facility; it's a stormwater management facility. So the Glencairn facility is the only one that was specifically built for flood control, and it is included in the study.
And another question for you, in the submission that I saw in there, it says you're not accounting for water coming from the Fernbank development. But my understanding was there wouldn't be, Councilor Gower's on here too. I don't believe there's much, if any, water coming from Fernbank into Glencairn. Most of that development have their own storm water plants and feed into the job, not the car.
Yeah, no, so we've used, the latest watershed boundary that, actually was done by the city of Ottawa, right? They built a very detailed model for Upper Kanata, and that reflects this intra-water transfer is basically a result of the stormwater collection, right, between the two watersheds. So that has been, reflected in the model that the city developed.
Okay, so there isn't any, or it's very small? If
No,
there is.
no.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate the answers.
Okay, Glenn, you had a question?
I think it's more of a comment, because I was going to ask staff to comment on the correspondence we've received, but I think you did a good job going through it and addressing issues that were raised in the correspondence, just in terms of the process, and in terms of the Carp River restoration plan objectives and modeling and so on. So thank you for that. Can you just reiterate again, though, the City of Ottawa's involvement in this process, what that looked like as you were coming to this final version that you're presenting in front of the board? How was the City of Ottawa staff involved in providing input or comments to the recommendations?
So it's, as I said, this project is it's part of the agreements that we have for floodplain mapping projects with the city. So we do it in partnership and also financial support. The city supports 50% of the project cost, right? And so typically, the help that we are receiving from the cities for the data, right? There's like obviously a lot of data that we need for all the infrastructure, for the LiDAR data, right? That was facilitated by the city, and paid for by the city, and then in terms of once we reach the stage when we have draft results, maps, that we meet with the city staff, planning, engineering departments, and we discuss, the mapping and quite in detail. So we are, the city staff is basically involved from stage one all the way to the end of the project.
And have city staff indicated in any way any concern or any potential mitigations that might be needed based on the new floodplain mapping? If there's any impact on infrastructure or development underway or future development land that might be designated, have they given any sense if there's any mitigation or any concerns with areas that might be affected by the changed floodplain?
Yes, and so there's few areas, for all the development and infrastructure, design was, the 1983 elevation was used, right, and all our permit applications. So there's, as I indicated, there are a few areas where our new flood elevations are above the 1983 elevations, and one of those areas is the area just upstream of the Campo bridge that was built recently. Right, so what we did, we sat down with the city and look at the existing infrastructure that was already put in place, if there are any impacts, for instance, for stormwater outlets or ponds, right? As all infrastructure is built with freeboards, right? So we've looked at this in detail to make sure, there's no no concerns with the infrastructure that is already in place.
Okay, thank you.
Sally would like to comment to that as well, and then I'll get to you, Kathy.
So just to add to what Eero said, staff did identify any changes between the 83 and the new mapping and walked through with city staff all of those, as well as all those cut and fills that Eero mentioned. And so, you know, over a series of meetings, all of those sites that might have been of concern were tabled with the city staff, the opportunity given for them to query us. And they were very satisfied, I can say, with Eero's very high level of confidence amongst city staff for the work that Eero and his team did.
Okay, Kathy.
Yeah, thank you very much for this. And I can report that the consultation was much appreciated in Canada, and I gather well attended. So thank you for that. This question is sort of related, but not really. But you know that unfortunately we had a drowning in the Carp River in the last few weeks, a young 11-year-old boy. And since then, the community has reached out to me, as you can imagine, to say, you know, this isn't safe, you know, that kids can ride across the bridge on their bikes and, you know, jump off and, you know, and that's pretty understandable that they're concerned about this. And, you know, the city, we've had conversations about, you know, you can't fence off areas like this. It's not something that is doable. But the community has said, is there anything that could be done? So one of the things they've talked about is putting up signs and planting a tree for where the child died and things like that. And I just wonder how much of that would be the responsibility of the Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority. Would they need to be consulted? Would they be involved in this at all? And believe me, I know that this is off topic, but I just thought, well, we're talking about this and this is new mapping and it's floodplain and people need to be aware of it, that it is a drowning hazard. Does the Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority have any role in what we might do if we were to do something?
I'm going to ask Sally to address that.
So our lease agreement or our license of occupancy for that property allows us naming rights to call it a conservation area. It allows us to put up signage mainly related to the role of that area in terms of, you know, natural environment, flood mitigation, et cetera, and to highlight what a fantastic project it was to take, you know, a very highly altered environment and convert it to the landscape that it is today. And it allows us to take educational groups through there without necessity of a permit. That in a nutshell. Oh, and to make modest, you know, habitat enhancements like the Osprey Tower that was installed last year by the foundation. So it's very limited in scope. Day-to-day operations and maintenance for that site still remains with the city of Ottawa. And so the type of things that you're speaking of, I would see being entirely within the purview of the city. I would hope that as a leasee that we'd be, you know, given heads up that some of this might be coming down the pipe. But I don't see us objecting to any of it unless it had some sort of implication on the functioning of the facility, in that any constructed works within a floodplain need to come to this, the Conservation Authority for approval if they fall within, you know, our jurisdiction. So I don't see us having any issue per se with anything you've spoken of.
Okay, great. So as we go down the road of figuring out what we might be able to do, I will at least make sure you are in the loop.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Janet?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on perceptions issue, and you did actually address the question I asked at the open house, which was the 350 line. And that is that as someone who lives on the river and also wearing another hat, gets a lot of comments on our Facebook, you know, Friends of the Carp River. There really is a perception out there that the river is flooding more often, and it is. And it stays flooded. And it's all this rain. I mean, to me, it's all the heavy rainfalls that we're getting. And I just think that perhaps there needs to be some kind of education of the public in the dynamics of the river and seeing the more frequent flooding and what might be causing it. And I realize how complex it is. I do realize that. But there is frustration and dissatisfaction in the communities that I hear and see online and talking to people, and there are perceptions that I think are incorrect, that I don't know whose responsibility this is. This might be the counselors to try to get the word out, and maybe MVCAs, and maybe putting together something for the general public. I think that would be useful, because the report that you gave here, there's a lot of information. I don't think it's online. I took as many notes as I could, but I don't want to misstate anything, because I just think that you need to put together like an information sheet about the Carp River. With that being that, Sally's nodding. So, maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 pages of diagrams and what it's all about, and the restoration, because there's also a lot of negative comments about the restoration not having worked. And, when they see all the pathways flooded all the time, and I keep explaining, well, it's in the floodplain. Anyway, that's my suggestion, and that I think the counselors who lie along the river up in the upper watershed and the lower one have issues that they need to clarify with people. Thank you.
Okay, I guess we'll leave that with Sally to address, and probably get back to Janet and just hash out the details, and perhaps the counselors, the Ottawa counselors as well. Okay, any other questions for Euro? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Bakary provided a report to us that came up through the committee. Does anybody have any questions with respect to that report and to what we've heard today? Okay. Seeing none, I would like to thank Ms. Bakary for being online and providing the report, and I'll move on to the resolution. Be resolved that the Board of the Directors adopt the report Carp River Floodplain Mapping Update dated June 2024 and the associated GIS-based regulation limit and floodplain maps as the delineation of area along the Carp River that are susceptible to flooding during the regional flood standard as defined in Schedule 1 of Ontario Regulation 41/24, and direct that the report, maps, and regulation limit be used in the implementation of Ontario Regulation 41/24. Do I have someone who will move that? Moved by Jeff, seconded by Glenn. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, taking it to a vote, all in favor. It is passed. And I'd like to say that this looks like a very positive project for cooperation of the City of Ottawa and the Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority. And hopefully it'll go forward, and other projects will come away that rather than going out and getting consultants, that the authority can handle for us at the various municipalities. Thank you. Okay, our next topic is land conservation strategy, which Sally is going to take us through.
Okay. So as you may recall, there are 6 deliverables that we are required to produce by the end of the year. And the land conservation strategy, known in the regulation as the conservation area strategy, is one of those. And the objective of this document that we're to produce is to set out policy governing the acquisition and disposal of all of our lands and the programs and services that we deliver on those lands. And in preparing that, we need to give consideration to how our land augments natural heritage resources out there, and in particular, how those lands integrate with other lands that you as the municipalities and provincial government and other NGOs own. And the second piece of this is the watershed-based resource management strategy, which is to speak about the guiding principles and objectives that inform those programs and services, and to summarize the background information regarding those programs and services, and demonstrate that we're in regulatory compliance, and identify any risks associated with those programs and services and the actions and costs to address them. To this point, that we've largely focused on the land aspect, and that's going to be the focus of my presentation today. But as we move forward, the land is inextricably tied to the programs we deliver on those. The risks associated with the ownership of that land and the programs are equally tied. So as we move out of looking at simply the land itself to the programs and services we deliver on them, invariably we'll be dealing with the matters of risk and cost recovery. And you'll see that in the discussion paper that you have before you. So as you'll recall, we started by doing the inventory, and the land inventory is more than just conservation areas, which is why in part we chose to rename this, because we are owners of dams, we're owners of vacant lots throughout the watershed that we acquired over time. And we need to include those because the legislation is quite clear that we have to address any land that we not only own, but also maybe have an easement or other legal agreement governing. So it's important to understand that whatever policy we develop as we move forward, it needs to give consideration to the full spectrum of assets, land assets that we own. So the first question that we are putting out there for consideration in the discussion paper is conservation versus preservation. And the reason why this is one of the first questions is because we could, as a conservation authority, just stay with the land that we have today for posterity. We could also consider taking on more land going forward. And the question would be, why would we do that and for what purpose? And conservation tends to allow some land uses to occur. You can set up a conservation area. You can actually do, forestry management. There's all sorts of things you can do on conserved land. Preservation more implies that you're leaving the land in its natural state. There's always variations on this, but at the end of the day, you can do either, and many conservation authorities do. So for example, it is the policy of some conservation authorities when people come in and want to donate land, that regardless of whether or not they see that it might be developable into a conservation area or not, they will accept that land because it has natural heritage value unto its own. And therefore they take it on as part of their land inventory to preserve what natural heritage values there are on the property. So that is something that this conservation authority could do going forward if it so chose. And I emphasize donations because I'm sure, as most of you would be aware, we don't have a reserve fund for the acquisition of land. We're not in a position to go out and buy land right now. So what we're talking about largely is a policy that would allow us to at least consider that possibility should people bring land to us that we think would be worthy of preservation if we wanted, or for conservation if we thought it had potential as a future conservation area. So you can see that, the questions being posed basically ask people how much more land and for what purpose do they think we should be acquiring land, if so. The next question is of a similar sort of nature. And it relates to, whether or not we think we need to be increasing public access to natural heritage areas. So for example, and I'm just going to take a quick look here. No, but in the documents you have before you is a drawing that shows pressures on natural areas, both for development as well as for recreational purposes. And the population of Ottawa as a major urban node with pressures associated with it is pushing potentially more and more development, not only development into County of Lanark in particular and up into the Frontenacs, but also increasing demand for natural recreation areas in this area. So there's both demand for recreational land, but there's also increased pressures on the ecological values and functions within this watershed. And similarly on the hydrologic functions of some of those areas, in particular wetlands. So there's a broad range of facility types that conservation authorities own and manage, listed on the left there of the slide. We actually have the first few. We have natural heritage parks. We have natural cultural heritage sites in the way of the Milliken Tail. We have a linear park in the K&P. We also have a beach at Palmerston Canado. But we don't have managed forests. We don't have managed portage routes currently. Historically, we used to. We don't have scenic lookouts, et cetera, down that list. But many CAs do. So again, when you think about the type of properties that are within our watershed, not just owned by MVCA, but by other jurisdictions such as yourselves and the province and NGOs, is there a need for us to potentially contemplate developing those kind of sites within the watershed to help meet demand in a manner that respects the natural heritage values and protects those natural heritage values going forward? Equally potentially controversial question is, should we be managing that museum collection going forward? A review of how museum collections are managed within our jurisdiction indicates that by and large, they're done, those museum collections are managed by not-for-profit, community-based organizations that may or may not receive municipal funding, that may or may not do their own fundraising. So the fact that MVCA owns and manages and delivers programming associated with a museum collection is unique within our jurisdiction, and it is no longer a category program and service under the new regulation. So we do need to be thinking about when the 5-year contract that all of your municipalities signed on for expires, what is the long-term vision for the management of those assets at that site? And then I raise portage routes in particular because they are there and we do get calls about them. And historically we had a role there, and they are an asset and a draw to our watershed, but nobody is actively managing them. The question is, does MVCA want to, in the absence of somebody else stepping forward, to take a more active role? What that might look like, I have no strong opinion on at the moment, but I think it's worthwhile to ask the question. So then we get into the question again, it's a nuance to some of the previous ones, but the difference between passive versus active recreation. And these are terms used in the regulation, which is why I'm using them. So passive recreation largely relates to, the types of hiking trails that we have. And it also includes, we've gotten guidance from the province that it does include our driveways, our outhouses, our parking lots, the bridges, et cetera. But it certainly doesn't, provide for a number of the things that you see listed there on the slide. But we have, a history as an organization, 50 years. We was doing education and stewardship right back in the early 70s. These are long-standing programs and services. If people are happy with that scope of programs and services, do we want to just continue them going forward? If there is community support for that and the municipalities are willing to continue to financially support them, then perhaps the status quo is fine. But are there other things that we think that we should be doing, maybe because the municipalities can't or the CA is in a better position to deliver? And to deliver those programs and services, do we actually need to acquire more property? And so in that respect, what I've put down in the discussion paper and in the background report to that, the current state report, is that I do not think it would be unreasonable for us to think about developing 2 or 3 additional conservation areas over the next 10 to 20 years. I think that there's sufficient demand within the watershed, a growing demand. It's the population of our urban areas, and your urban areas is growing at a fantastic rate. We saw an increase of usage of all of our conservation areas during COVID. They have not gone back to pre-COVID levels, and we see that they're just going to continue to grow. So I think it's something that we need to be contemplating and developing policy around. So now getting to the dams, this is a very interesting slide here, because, you know, during the course of this work, I was learning about the history of how we acquired these various dams. And the running theme for me was that people came to MVCA and said, would you take our dam? And by and large, MVCA said, sure. And we said sure at that time, because at that time we were 85% funded by the province. But that's not the case today. We're 3% funded by the province today for our operations and maintenance. And our capital program is 50% if it's a qualifying structure. So not even all of our structures are qualifying for that WECI funding that we spoke of earlier. And 2 of the structures in particular are only there to maintain recreational water levels. And that, you know, meaning they have very localized benefit. They're not providing any sort of habitat value. They're not providing flood relief. So one of them is in Tay Valley, that's the Bennett Lake Dam. And the second one is in North Frontenac, and that's the Pine Lake Dam. Oh, no, pardon me, the Farm Lake Dam. So under the new regulation, it's very clear that the conservation authorities have the wherewithal that if a facility is not, you know, of shared value or benefit to all the contributing municipalities, that alternative cost recovery methods could be considered. I asked Stacy to do a call around to just get a sense from some of the other CAs if they implement a variable cost recovery approach. And the short answer is yes, others do. It's not universal the case. So did my battery die? Okay, well, anyway, there is discretion for us to contemplate that. And that's one of the questions being posed here. So also related to the dam properties, so if somebody came in the door tomorrow and offered us a dam, would we be as enthusiastic? And I put this because MNRF has at times alluded to the fact that maybe it might want to divest of 1 or more of its dams. We have been approached by people to develop hydro at Carleton Place in particular. How would we approach those? Or if a municipality did come to us in future, you know, who knows with the impacts of climate change and development over time, a municipality and the Lake Association might want to come to us and say, hey, can you help us support recreational water levels? Given the economic value that they provide to communities, you know, it's not an unforeseeable potential. So what would our thoughts be around doing that kind of work, and what sort of financial framework would we put in place for that? As you can see, as I'm going through this, these are not small questions. These are significant policy decisions that as an organization, this regulation is asking us to contemplate. So because of that, the regulation says we need to do public engagement on this. These are not small decisions or questions. And so I have been going out to all your municipalities. I just have Beckwith next week, and I believe next month I'm up in Greater Madawaska. I've met with all your municipalities and the counties of Frontenac and Lanark. So briefing them on what this is about. We've also done a fair amount of one-on-one outreach to some of the organizations that we know have a specific interest. And so once I receive your sign off today on these consultation documents with any amendments that you may recommend, we're going to be doing comprehensive outreach to the community. We've already got ads that are ready to be placed in the local papers. Next week, I want to do an information session online. We're going to be, obviously notifying all the lake associations and community associations, because we are a community-based organization. We're funded by your municipalities, and we're a watershed-wide organization that I think people have an interest in helping to guide the policy developments. We're trying to organize meetings with the Public Advisory Committee and the Museum Advisory Committee. We may end up making that a joint meeting, and it may end up getting pushed to August because we haven't had success so far finding a date that will work for everybody. But the goal is, at the end of the day, and I'll stop sharing here, is to come back with draft policy to the board in October based upon the feedback that we've received, and then to finalize a policy document by December. So I'm happy to entertain any questions you may have.
And this is a very consequential document, and certainly something that we are going to have to consider a lot over the next while to come up with whatever direction that we want to go as a board. So any questions for Sally? Okay, Kathy.
Sort of a comment and then a question. So if you haven't watched Bryce Conrad's annual report, CEO of Hydro Ottawa, to Ottawa City Council, it's beyond fascinating in terms of the need for additional hydroelectric power. It's very important for you to understand just how much electricity everyone is going to need. So I think that where it is, your slide said feasible and whatever, that it would work. The answer would be yes, we should do that wherever possible, because we really need a lot more power. That's one. Second thing I was going to say is, in public consultation, you say key stakeholders. Would one of them be Hydro Ottawa? It's 100% owned by the city of Ottawa.
Certainly, it wasn't on a list, candidly, but I can add it. The local hydro producers on the Mississippi in Elmont and Goleta and the like were very interested historically. So, but we can absolutely include Hydro Ottawa in that.
Okay, super. That was my only comment and question.
Okay, any other questions? Richard?
Yeah, Sally, it doesn't say about anything about the economic costs of doing this. Like our funding isn't going up by expanding. We're handing over the K&P because we can't manage that. And at the same time, we're looking at expanding our recreation and doing things. So how are we going to talk about what the cost of this is? Because that's a big part of it. Like I can see doing what we're doing and doing it well, or expanding and even getting land for free, there's a cost. And where's that going to come from?
Right. So yes, the next stage of work will absolutely consider cost implications. As it relates to the KMP, a linear asset of 35 kilometers is very different than the type of sites that I'm contemplating for conservation areas that are, of a limited size, limited trail length, and you go to the site and you can manage it and you're in and out. 35 kilometers of trail is a very different animal. And we acquired it at a time when there were no other takers. And but now the counties are absolutely interested in taking over that asset, and because they're in that business, they are better positioned to assume and maintain that asset in a way that we're not. If we managed linear assets the way the counties did, then I may have a different opinion on that. But I think that what this regulation is asking us to do is to ask that kind of question: who's best positioned to deliver a certain type of system or service? We're good at conservation areas that are site specific as opposed to linear in nature.
Okay, any other questions? Janet?
Yeah, just a comment, and I realize how time constrained you are, but doing public consultation for 6 weeks in the summer, which ends the beginning of September, is a really terrible time, and I would bet you're going to get some pushback from people that it was that you didn't properly consult. That's what I would just going to consider. And then I actually have a question, which is, because I was confused. Are you looking for comments from the general public? Or really? Okay, so it's not just going to be special organizations and, okay, thanks.
Okay.
So again, like who's going to say no to this? Like, of course we want more conservation areas and of course we want all this, but who's going to pay for it? Like I just think those, if you go to the public, sure, everybody wants it. And then it's going to come back down to how are we going to pay for it? So I just wonder what the process is going to be once everybody says they want the world. And just like your dams, trying to fix your dams, we can't afford to do it. So anyway, that's my question.
Okay, so just to acknowledge, Sally has acknowledged Janet's question since we're being recorded. So Sally just nodded her head. So that'll provide the comment for that. And yes, Richard, I think that has to be certainly a major part of this going forward, is once we get to the point where we start looking at it, saying, okay, look at cost benefit analysis and that sort of thing. Definitely. Okay. You answer?
Well, I'll just add that as the board is familiar, we have our long list of capital and programs and services needs assessment that we do every year. If we had direction from the board to start to move in that direction, there would be any number of implementation activities that we'd need to do, all of which would have a cost item associated with them, all of which would fall on that needs assessment and get prioritized year over year against everything else. So that's why I say 10 to 20 years. This is not something we're running out and doing tomorrow. It would be a signal to begin a process.
Yeah, and hopefully there is some low-hanging fruit out there. So seeing no other questions, the motion is be resolved that the Board of Directors approve release of the attached documents for public consultation in accordance with the consultation plan for development of a land conservation strategy as set out in this report. Do I have someone to move that? Okay, moved by Bev, seconded by Dina. All those in favor? Carried. Okay. Our next two items are for an in-camera. So I'm going to read the motion to go in camera. The committee moved to in-camera session for discussion of the following matter: a position plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried out to be carried out on behalf of the authority. And further resolved that Sally McIntyre, Scott Lawrence, and Kelly Hollington remain in the room. Do I have someone to move that? Moved by Jeff. Oh. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to serve notice that I'd previously declared a conflict of interest on item 8, so won't be participating in that part of the in-camera meeting.
Okay. Perfect. And do I have a seconder? Yeah. Okay. Taylor has seconded it. All those in favor? Carried.